All right, we appear to be live, and thank you, Philip, for joining me today. And we're going to be discussing and debating the existence of God. And if you can convince me of that, then we'll narrow it down a little bit. If you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah. Well, just to reiterate, my name is Phillip. I have a YouTube channel, Phillip Christian YouTube. Sorry, I just had you. So let me start again because I had you playing in the background.
Oh, no problem.
So my name is Phillip. I have a YouTube channel, Phillip Christian YouTube. I'm here to debate Snake on the existence of God. And then from there, depending on how far we get, we can talk about which God it is. So
Cool.
I'll send you my opener in a private chat, and then I'll read out the first 3 sentences,
All right.
and then you can respond. Okay, so premise 1, infinite matter cannot operate without an outside non-physical prime mover. Therefore, the universe is finite in size. Premise 2, beyond the curvature of the finite universe is an eternal and infinite in size property. My conclusion, teleology from countless stars, countless planets, and biogenesis proves the property outside the universe is conscious and isn't random. Therefore, God exists. What is your response?
I'm not sure how you conclude that from these things that the universe is conscious, or the creator or property outside the universe is conscious.
Well, I need to clarify things with you. So I'll ask you a very direct question. In an atheistic worldview, do you believe matter had a beginning, or is it eternal?
I'm not really sure. And it wouldn't be an atheist worldview necessarily, because a lot of physicists or just scientists in general who work with matter are also theists. So I'm not a physicist. I'm barely versed in physics and cosmology. A little more than your average person, but I would never claim to be even close to an expert. The only thing that I mean by atheism is I pretty much have no interest in even claiming or proving that there are no gods. The only thing that I care about, literally, the only thing I care about in the discussion of atheism and theism is if theism has good arguments or not. And I haven't come across any. So
You
we'll
don't
see
need,
if you can clarify yours, and maybe it'll be a good one.
you don't need to be a physicist to come to the conclusion that God is the necessary prime mover. But to reiterate my question is that matter either had a beginning from absolute nothingness or it's eternal. They're the options. So this is a
Yeah,
true
I don't know.
dichotomy, and it comports with the law of excluded middle. So even if you say I don't know, we then have to explore both options together. Because no matter what option you choose, it will always fall back to a God. So if you go down the path of eternal infinite matter, you're going down the road of Hinduism. If you choose matter having a beginning, you're going down the path of the Bible. So we have to now.
I think something has to be eternal. So
Okay.
something out there, whether it created matter or matter is a part of that or matter is the beginning. I tend to lean towards something eternal created matter.
So now my question to you is, do you believe that stars and planets are eternal, or was there a stage in time before the formation of stars and planets?
There must have been a stage in time before they formed.
Okay, so
is my understanding of physics, and it's pretty basic physics too.
you have one particular of matter. Is that correct?
Actually, it might have been lots of different. There's actually now theories that kind of the Big Bang was more of a bubble with lots of little points of origin. But I don't know.
A bubble is a finite particular with a curvature. Therefore, beyond the curvature of that finite particular is something else which would have to be infinite in size. So just to clarify, because you said that there was a time before the formation of stars and planets, is my next question now is the matter finite in size or infinite in size?
The matter seems to be finite.
Okay, so
But
you have,
again, I'm not sure.
they're the only two options. So you have a physical particular. So therefore, beyond the curvature of that physical particular has to be non-physical. So that non-physical shares attributes that of a god, because that non-physical would have to be eternal, infinite in size, three-dimensional. There would be a color attached to it, and that non-physical property would have to have an omnipotence attribute to interact and manipulate the matter with a consciousness for there to be a shift from 0 to 1 in movement.
I think that's where we fundamentally disagree, is because even if there was a prime mover, which there must be something approximate to that, but it's not necessarily conscious and it's not necessarily omnipotent. Its only function and only capability might be to create matter, and that's where it ends. And
So
I
to
don't
go,
see how you can tell that it's conscious either.
because it chose to interact with the matter. So even if I grant you finite matter and beyond it is infinite non-physical material, well then what is the next step from that process?
You cut out there a little bit. I think it was just your last word.
So just to go back, so you have finite matter, and then beyond that finite matter is something non-physical. So even if I grant you that, you still need a prime mover to get the expansion of that matter. And then you need a retraction to get a black hole. But then that you have an upside down road safety cone going nowhere. So that's the analogy of the black hole.
Well, a black hole is just lots of gravity and matter in the same place. But I still don't understand how it's conscious, because things can quote unquote choose and not be conscious. I don't know how it's a conscious choice. Things can affect other things without being conscious.
I need to clarify something, because from my understanding, there are two versions of a secular Big Bang. So the one we're discussing is, in one universe, matter expanded. And then the second version is that matter condensed into a black hole and caused a tear, and then popped matter into a second universe. So which one of those two are you proposing here?
Neither.
Well, the Big Bang. So are you saying that there was stars and planets are eternal?
No.
Well, then you have a time before the formation of stars and planets. So
Mm, it gets funky when you're talking about a time before space, because space and time are actually the same thing. But yeah, that's the only way we can kind of talk about it is in sequential. There was probably a state before time and space and matter existed, or at least expanded.
Well, time and space is immaterial. The theory behind it. See, I'm a flat earther, so if you assert time and space, they are both immaterial. So again, though time and space shares attributes that of a god, because they have to be eternal, infinite in size, have an omnipotent attribute to interact and manipulate matter, and with a consciousness outside of time for there to be a shift from 0 to 1, because time is the measurement of matter. Sorry, time is the measurement of the movement of matter. So you need a prime mover outside of time with a consciousness to directly choose to go from 0 to 1.
Why does it have to be conscious? Why can't it just be something that affects another thing?
Well, you have an omnipotent. See, I'll just reiterate. So I'll reiterate 2 points. So you have an omnipotent non-physical attribute,
Why does it have to be omnipotent?
because that non-physical interacting with the physical needs an omnipotent, an all-powerful attribute to manipulate and shape matter
No.
into stars and planets.
What if that's the only thing it can do is collapse some sort of quantum state, which turns nothingness into matter?
Hang on, so are you saying absolute nothingness as a starting point?
No, I don't believe absolute nothingness is a possibility, but physical nothingness, which you can basically annihilate matter and antimatter, and they annihilate each other if they touch. And you can also make them both appear out of seemingly nowhere.
Hang on, so you have you made the claim of physical nothingness. So would that just be matter?
I'm not a physicist, so I don't understand it that well, but I know that matter and antimatter can annihilate each other when brought together, and so the reverse process is also possible.
But if
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a
matter or
omnipotent thing.
dark
It just
matter,
has to be.
but
Oh,
we are at square 0. So you have finite matter, and right next to it is this antimatter. So that needs a consciousness for there to be any sort of interaction.
why?
Why would there be? Because you say the antimatter collides with the matter and causes a chemical reaction of some sort. So then why wasn't there a reaction from the start? Why was there a movement from 0 to 1? That dark matter you're invoking would be God. Because
Well, dark matter is something else, completely different. But no, it doesn't require consciousness. You're not really connecting the dots there.
no, you have,
Not every effect needs a conscious cause.
but you have finite matter, and then right next, without any gaps, next to it is the dark matter. So that dark matter needs a consciousness for there to be any interaction. Because if you're saying that they were together from at square 0, well then what's the difference from 0 to 1 without a consciousness? It needs a consciousness
Why?
and an omnipotent.
You're just asserting that.
No, you're asserting it doesn't have a consciousness.
No, I'm saying why does it need a consciousness. I have a reason to believe that, so I'm not going to.
So just to reiterate, you have finite matter, and then next to it is the dark matter. There's nothing in between of those two particulars. So without an omnipotent attribute, so are you granting me an omnipotent attribute to the dark matter first?
No, it might be the case that it's the only thing it can do is create matter and nothing else. That wouldn't be omnipotence.
Hang on, so the dark matter is creating matter?
If that's your proposition, I don't think that's what dark matter does.
No, we are in your worldview. This is your religion, your belief. So you have.
I don't really have a belief about dark matter. I don't know anything about it other than it has some gravity effect. And we don't know anything else really about it. That's all I know.
Yeah, gravity is an inside mechanism, an inside prime mover. But to go back to the dark matter, so you have finite matter, so one particular, and then the second particular is the dark matter, and there's no third particular, so there's nothing in between of those two particulars. So then there would have to be a shift in time from 0 to 1. So that requires either the matter or the dark matter to have a consciousness to interact with each other because they were stuck together to begin with.
Why does it need to be a consciousness? They have properties, and like, do you agree that atoms can interact with each other without a consciousness?
Yeah, but atoms is just energy.
Why does it have to be a consciousness that causes this change? And what created that matter and antimatter in the first place?
No, this worldview you're in, the matter and antimatter are both eternal, unless you're falling back to absolute nothingness, which you reject. So then you're left with eternal matter and dark matter. So
I actually tend to think that's not the case. So, but I don't understand physics that enough to make much of a.
Hang on, what's not the case?
I think that matter probably is not eternal. Whatever made it is eternal.
Okay, but we'll play that out. So the cause of the matter would have to be immaterial. So that goes back to a God, because
why?
That immaterial would have to be infinite in size, eternal, omnipotent to create.
Why would it need to have any size at all? Space is a material dimension for matter to move in. So why would it? I don't understand how it has a size at all, and I don't understand how it needs to be omnipotent. It could be the case that it's sizeless, or it could be the case that it has a small size and all it can do is create matter and do nothing else.
So there's 2 points there.
So we can't. There's no way for us to narrow down and say the only option is a creator God, and beyond that, there's questions of, well, why is that God there in the first place? So it's it's not actually an explanation at all. God is one of the worst explanations there is.
Okay, there's 3 points I want to address there. So the first one, infinite in size, meaning that there is no curvature to it. It has height, depth, and width, but there's no edge. There's no curvature. And then the second point is the omnipotence attribute. You can't deny this is a brute fact. Like if matter, immaterial, creating matter, the size of the universe as it is now, that requires an omnipotent attribute for there to be the immaterial to the material. And then the third option,
But why? Why are you stating that? Why couldn't it
well,
be the only thing that it is capable of doing is creating matter and nothing else? How did you rule that
because,
out?
because that immaterial is creating matter ex nihilo. Like the matter
But how do
wasn't
you
there.
but how do you know that's not its only capability or one of finite capabilities?
Well, you're just limiting. That is a God. You're just limiting God's power at that point.
No, I'm saying how do you know what level of power that has?
Well, okay, so because there is energy and matter, so that immaterial cause created matter and it created energy. So that's
What if that's
two.
the only thing it can do?
Okay, well then it was able to manipulate and form stars and planets. So not only did it create matter and energy, it was able to interact and manipulate the matter and energy to form stars and planets.
Well, how do we know that? The stars and planets form based on how the particles interact. So if all it's doing is creating matter, the matter is creating structures within itself without direction, or without conscious direction at least, because gravity will take care of that on its own. Attraction between particles will just cause things to aggregate, and I don't see how you could get from there's an attraction between particles to therefore it was manipulated by a conscious mind.
Well, so the assertion of gravity is so I'll grant you infinite matter, so eternal infinite matter, and then your assertion of
Well,
gravity is an inside mechanism. So that's like a pool of water creating ice cubes inside of itself. That gravity would form the gravity. You need a black hole. The gravity is just one particular compressing all the matter into a singularity. So you have an upside down road safety cone, and the pointy bit is the singularity. But beyond the curvature of that pointy bit is more matter. So there wasn't a road safety cone to begin with. There wasn't a black hole to begin with. You need an outside, non-physical prime mover, not contingent on matter.
I can probably agree with that. I just don't think that we can establish whether it's conscious.
There would have to be, because we are before the formation of stars and planets. So you have one particular of matter. So there would have to be a shift from 0 to 1. So without a choice, you need an eternal prime mover. And then that eternal prime mover needs to have a consciousness. It needs to make a choice to interact with that matter. And if you reject that, well, then how else would you explain it?
Well, I don't necessarily need to explain it. I'm just
But
looking to see if your explanation makes any sense. And so far, it's just an assertion that it had to be a conscious choice, even though I already know that particles can interact with each other and with themselves without conscious choices.
no, but in between of those particles is more energy. But that's square 7. You need to go back to square 1 before the formation of stars and planets. Because those particles you were mentioning earlier, they're finite particulars. So you have infinite matter, and then outside of it is an infinite non-physical. See, this is where you're going down the path of Hinduism. But there needs to be a choice from 0 to 1, unless you're invoking that it was random. Is that what you're invoking?
It doesn't have to be random, but it doesn't have to be a choice either, because things that aren't random happen without choices all the time.
But they interact. You have two particulars, nothing in between of those particulars. So then,
well, how did they get there in the first place, though?
well, you're saying that they are eternal, these particulars. So then,
I don't the matter I don't think is eternal, but that's just kind of where the direction I lean. But I don't really know much enough to put my foot down on it.
okay, so if it's not absolute nothingness as the starting point, you're then proposing that it's an eternal, infinite, non-physical prime mover with a color. There has to be a color attached to it.
What? Why is there a color now?
Well, because the matter that it created would be colorless. So the law of identity.
What? But matter has color because of light.
Yeah, but the light is energy. So I have to. We'll bring this back to cosmology, but I have to bring in the Bible for this. So Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. So he created matter. And then Genesis 1:3, God said, let there be light. So and light is energy. So you need an outside source for there to be energy, for there to be color. But going back to your worldview, you have infinite matter that is colorless. So then you would still
No.
Okay, well, if it's
I believe that there was finite matter with color, which is the exact opposite.
okay, even if I grant you that, so the immaterial, infinite in size, three-dimensional prime mover, without a consciousness, created in finite matter.
Sorry, I lost you around created. Immaterial being without consciousness created.
Infinite in size matter or finite in size matter?
It seems to be finite in size, but there appears to be no limit for the size of space. Not that there is currently infinite space, but that there's not necessarily a limit. It can keep expanding.
So, so then the space would be that immaterial prime mover prior to the matter. So
yeah, I mean, we can even just work with that. Say there's an immaterial prime mover, but how do we know that it's conscious?
See,
is what it comes down to, and we're going in circles.
Occam's razor puts God as the winner because you are invoking an immaterial cause without a consciousness and without an omnipotence attribute. God is the simpler option.
I don't think so. I think the simpler option is that something is able to just do a finite number of things. I think the most complex and most far-fetched option is to say that you start with the most complex, the most powerful, the most all-knowing possible being.
Yeah, but
I think that it's simpler to start with something simple and then build in complexity.
No, but you're invoking absolute miracles for there to be.
No, do you believe in miracles? You believe the creation of the universe was a miracle, right?
No. God is not a miracle. He's a necessary prime mover. But
You
what
don't believe
you're
in any miracles? What is a miracle to you?
well, it depends from what worldview you're asking me that question.
English.
No, from what? From a theistic worldview or a non-theistic worldview?
Just the English language.
Yeah, but there's two different worldviews. But the to go back,
It's something that's not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. That's what I mean by a miracle.
yeah, well, okay. So to go back to, so we are on zero, square zero. So you have, so just to steelman your position, you have an eternal, infinite in size, non-physical starting point. Is that correct?
I would say size is not a part of anything I would assert.
But is
I'd
it
just say
three?
there needs to be something eternal that created either matter or created something that created matter.
But if it has to be okay. Well, is it three-dimensional? Does it have height, depth, and width?
I wouldn't think so. I think that would be something that comes along with matter is space time.
So like, so then from there, okay. So so you're assigning the value of space and time to the starting point.
And according to everything we know about space time, yeah. So I try and start with we know nothing. Okay, so but we know there must be something that made it all happen because something's here. So something you can label that the prime mover. Okay, it it's probably I believe it would have to be eternal, or else something else would have had to cause it. So, but that's as far as I can get. I can't get to consciousness.
No,
I
but
can't
you
get
have
to
you have two hurdles now. You have a consciousness and an omnipotent attribute. So to address the omnipotent side of it, so the space and time created infinite matter. So was it instant or was there a gradual process to it?
Mm, not sure.
Well, it has to be one of the two. It either
Does it
popped
matter
into
which
it,
one it is?
but then
Or
if it was a
would you say both lead to God?
well, God, it would be instant for God. And we could test that ourselves by closing our eyes and visualizing anything. He's the consciousness. But to go back to your space and time, if there wasn't, if it didn't come to existence instantly, there would have to be a gradual process to it. So that's more miracles upon more miracles. That is not random. And then if you invoke that it's finite, well then if you're standing inside of that finite particular, you would see something beyond the curvature of that finite particular. So that space and time would have a color attached to it. So then
S-
that's
Space and time doesn't have color. Color is a result of light interacting with matter.
no, but you're saying that the space and time, the starting point, it wasn't energy. It was something immaterial.
It could be energy.
But then the energy, okay, there's two problems with that.
Energy is essentially just potential.
Hang on, so are you now saying that energy is eternal?
I think it's more likely to be eternal than matter. Yeah.
So
I
even
think
if I
if I had to pick one, matter would come from energy.
even if I grant you that, you have infinite energy converting into infinite matter. So you're still left with one particular that needs an outside prime mover to get finite particulars inside of itself. Unless you're saying that the
Well,
finite, yep,
it doesn't have to be infinite or finite, but the main sticking point is just how can you tell that it would have been conscious? Why can't one just affect another? Conscious or omnipotent?
no, it has to be finite or infinite. It has to be, it either has a curvature or it doesn't.
But that's not really my concern uh, with theism versus atheism. I don't really care whether the prime mover is infinite or finite. Well, I guess it would have to be eternal. Um, what I'm concerned about is because this seems to define God is consciousness and omnipotence. So if we can't establish those traits, then what are we doing?
Yeah, well, to elaborate on omnipotence in context of this, the the cause of the immaterial, sorry, the cause to the material would be immaterial, and that immaterial would have to have an omnipotence attribute to interact and manipulate the matter. So would you agree with that?
No, it might just have the ability to interact with matter and nothing else.
But we are not. No, we're on the first
Like how would you
attribute.
how would you tell the difference between something that can create matter and something that can create matter and do literally anything else, which
Hang
is
on, say that
omnipotent?
again.
How would you tell the difference between something simple that can just all it can do is create matter and something more complex that can create matter and do literally anything else, which is omnipotence?
No, but that's that. What you're
Those are
invoking.
those are the two options. We have to be able to rule one or more out. So if it's a multiple choice, how would you eliminate the option of it can only create matter, or creating matter is one of a finite set of its powers? How would you go
Um,
about eliminating those?
you need to reiterate just that last. I'm hearing you, but I just need to.
So
Um,
there's at least three options. Either it's the prime mover would have the ability to create matter and do nothing else, or it has the ability to create matter and do one or two or a finite number of things, or it has the ability to create matter and the ability to do anything else, aka omnipotence.
yeah, for the immaterial, so that would be one particular. So for it to create a second particular of opposite material of itself, and for it to be for there to be a size to it, so the size of the universe now, that requires an omnipotent attribute, even without or with a
But
consciousness.
you're just asserting that. I don't You're
But then
just
you're
saying it requires it, but you're not giving me a reason to believe that requirement. And the best way for me to be able to do that is to be able to eliminate two out of those three options, the first
no, but
two that I just gave to you.
then you're saying that the matter came ex nihilo. So you're going back to it being random.
I think that matter exists because it can't not exist, because absolute nothingness is an inherent contradiction.
No, but you're
Something does
the
exist.
No, but the prime mover you're invoking here is time and space. So then you're saying that time and space, which is immaterial, created the material. So that time and space would have had to have had an attribute other than it being immaterial.
No, I think that the prime mover would have to be timeless and spaceless.
Yeah, so you need see that's the first red flag. And then the second red flag is, why did it create matter to begin with? What caused, who flicked the switch on that?
Why does it have to be a who?
It needs to be that, because you're saying that that's time and space is one particular.
Well, there has to be something. For some reason, there has to be something, whether that's some simple thing that just creates matter or whether it's a god. So either way, you need to explain why there's anything at all, and that also goes for a god. Why is there a god? What created the god? If you're just going to accept, well, it was always there and it had no cause, then I can say that for any number of other simpler prime movers.
Okay, so God, absolute nothingness as a starting point is impossible. And we've established
I
that.
agree. Yeah, I agree.
So the only alternative is for something to be eternal.
Hmm.
So,
But
and if, and if,
how do we establish that its properties are omnipotence and consciousness?
well, because that the omnipotence to create matter, for something weightless to create something with weight. And then not only
That
that,
What if that's its only ability, though? Is it
but
can
even,
convert energy, or energy can convert itself into matter, and that's all that like the quantum fluctuations. That's all they can do is just fluctuate, and sometimes matter pops out and antimatter pops out of that fluctuation, and then the matter interacts with each other.
but even if I grant you that, so that would be the first miracle. And then the second one would be the formation of stars and planets. So the formation of stars and planets would be a result from the time and space that you're invoking,
Are you
correct?
saying that because if if everything in the universe results from that first act of creating matter, therefore that prime mover is therefore omnipotent because everything resulted causally from its first action? That's
Yeah.
your
Well, it either, what you're invoking, it either came into existence instantly or there was a gradual process to it. But regardless, I don't, well, but the thing is, you can't get around that brute fact that it had to have come into existence instantly. And then the gradual process would be the expansion of it. But the brute fact is, it would have to have come into existence instantly, no matter what size it is. Would you?
I'm not so sure, but I can give you that. It's not necessarily a problem for me. Um, and even if you want to go with that understanding of omnipotence, is that it's omnipotent because it started a chain reaction by which everything else is a result. I'm even fine with that. What I The main stumbling block for me of believing in a god is consciousness, because I could even call an unconscious creator of the universe a god if you wanted to. Like, I wouldn't use that label, but if you said that was God, then sure, I would believe in a God. But to me, the word God means a conscious being. So that's, even if it was a conscious being that had very little power, but still made the decision to create the universe and then has very little power after that, I would still call that a God because it's conscious. The consciousness for me is the main aspect of a God. And of course, power over some aspect of creation or elemental existence, you know.
But
But consciousness is the main aspect.
if we play that out, so if it's not a consciousness, it would then have to be what? It would have to be randomness.
Not necessarily.
Well, what else would there be?
Why is consciousness uh the only way we can get order or rules?
Because everything has to be there from the start. But you're
Well,
invoking.
the fundamental rules, if you want to call them that, have to be there from the start. But how does a consciousness create order without itself having an order imposed upon it? Because a consciousness would have to follow certain rules and operate in a certain manner that it couldn't operate without there being rules for it to follow.
So, but that consciousness would have to be eternal for there to be any measurement of time. So that has to be an unmoved mover. Because all those particulars would have to be there from the start, because unless you're invoking a new particular coming out of nowhere, unless an outside particular inserted a new particular. So and that's and to go back, if it's not conscious from the start, then the only alternative, it has to be random. There's no getting around that.
Well, sure, there's another option. It had order without consciousness.
Order without no, but the matter having a beginning. So your space and time creating matter, which you've granted me.
Not space
Have
and
you granted
time.
me that?
No, I think space and time were probably created in the same instant as matter, if it was in the same instant.
And so
Or
now you're saying that
if it was all created at the same time. But if you had matter created in many different instances, space time would be created along with that each particle of matter.
now just to
But
clarify, so you're saying that space and time had a beginning?
probably.
So the immaterial space and time, by your definition, would be immaterial. So then the core, what would be the cause to the immaterial?
Well, it would be physical, but not. But yeah, probably immaterial.
But if the cause to the immaterial is the material, well, then that would be the eternal matter, unless you're going further back even more.
Well, whatever. Matter is probably eternal in the sense that it was converted from something that is eternal, and matter is the space and time version of whatever that eternal thing is. So, like, energy can convert to matter, matter can convert to energy. So something probably converted energy into matter. and that would be the prime mover. But why are we just asserting that it has a consciousness just because we have no explanation? That would just be God of the gaps. And if you're saying, well, God is the only unmoved mover that there can be, I don't understand that argument either, because why couldn't just something much simpler be an unmoved mover that just doesn't need a cause? Because
But
there's no explanation of why God exists in the first place, or why he's unmoved, or why he has no cause. And if you had that explanation, you could just give that to any amount of other less powerful prime movers.
God is the simpler option in this debate because he has everything from the start.
Yeah,
He has the
that seems more complex. The more stuff you put in it means it's more complex. So by that argument, I reject based on Occam's razor.
no, but multiple you have multiple steps. It's not the first step of matter. You then have to then address the formation of matter and then the color attached to that space and time.
But why don't we
So
have to address the formation of God?
the God is infinite in size, but he has the consciousness and the omnipotence attribute to create the matter and then to manipulate the matter.
But we can't really define things into existence. Otherwise, I could just say, well, my atheist creator, it just has no cause by definition. So, but we
But the,
can't tell whether those definitions are real or not.
the space and time as the starting point. So I'm going to ask you a clarifying question. So you may have answered this before. So if I grant you space and time creating matter, was the matter finite in size or infinite in size?
I would say matter is probably finite in size, but I don't think space time made it. I think that space time is the result of matter's creation. It's matter cannot exist without space time, and space time cannot exist without matter. They're
But before,
unless matter is absolutely frozen in time, then it's frozen in space and it's not doing anything, and it might as well. It essentially doesn't exist. So once it starts moving, then it's in space and time.
but you're saying that there was a time where there was no matter and the only particular that exists was the space and time. Is that correct?
No, no.
So you're saying
I
that
think
matter is,
space time would be created as matter is created. That they're
hang on,
one and
say
the
that
same.
again.
I think space time would have to be one in one with matter. They can't exist without the other.
But you're saying that matter had a beginning, and then prior to that was the space time, which is eternal.
No, the space time can't exist without matter. So
Hang on. So just to clarify, so did what you're invoking, did matter have a beginning or is it eternal?
I think matter as the state of matter had a beginning. It was probably converted from something that existed already in a different state, but I think space time would have to exist as soon as matter exists and not before.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying that the space time took a different form. to make the finite matter?
Well, it's probably something like energy took a different form to create matter, and then matter can travel in time and space.
But then, see, that's like a pool of water making ice cubes inside of itself. Because if you invoke that the space-time took a different form, but the finite particular. Hang on, let me start again. So you have infinite and eternal space-time, and then from there it took a different shape, but the shape was a finite in size particular. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say it was infinite. I don't think space time existed until matter existed. So
No, but
all I
you're saying,
can be reasonably sure of is that there was something eternal, whether that's energy or something that makes energy, whether it's just the strings or the quantum fluctuations. It's probably immaterial, still physical though, relating to physics. And it either converted itself or converted something else into matter, or somehow created matter. But
yeah, it'd have to have created it, because you're saying that the space-time is eternal and immaterial, and then it took a different form. So that still requires an ex nihilo creation. That still requires an omnipotence attribute.
why?
Because the space-time you're invoking is immaterial. And then from there, a finite particular of matter either came into existence or it was a result. It took form from the space and time. But because the space and time are immaterial, that requires a creation point.
Well, it was certainly the result of something, but whether that something was a conscious choice, I'm still not understanding how we can eliminate the other options that are unconscious causes, or any way to even confirm, because you could confirm by elimination or you could confirm with corroborating evidence. I don't see how you could do either one for this consciousness property.
Yeah, but what you're invoking, you have eternal, infinite in size, space-time. And then from there, so now I have to ask you another clarifying question. Did it create matter or did it take a different form?
I think there was no space time, and then the energy probably converted into matter and space time.
But the whole of the space-time would convert its whole self into a new infinite particular, not a finite in size particular, unless it has a consciousness. Or,
What difference does consciousness make? Like, and where does it come from?
well, or someone outside of that space-time inserting that finite particular. So that goes back to the analogy of the pool of water making finite ice cubes inside of itself. The pool of water would turn its whole self into a new particular, not into multiple particulars. Because even if I grant you finite particulars, well, you're still stuck at zero.
But what you would be stuck at zero if we're just examining consciousness too. How do you explain the origin of consciousness?
No, God is an unmoved mover, because there's no room to insert a new particular. Those particulars had to have been there from the start. So to give you an understanding is that of a dream. When we are in a dream, we don't question how we got into that dream. We just are a part of that dream. We just are moving in that dream. God just is. He's not contingent on anything.
Oh, well, why can't I just say, well, the energy that created the matter just is? Doesn't need an explanation.
No, but is the energy eternal, or did it
Yeah.
have a beginning? Eternal.
Yeah. If
But if
you
you
can just say God just is, I can grant that to you, but then I can be able to grant that to any of the other explanations, and you still haven't eliminated them. So as soon as anyone grants you that option as an attribute of any of the prime movers or origins of the universe, then it can apply to any and all proposed origins of the universe, including non-God ones. So if you can just assert it just is, then so can I.
hang on, so you have infinite and eternal energy. So are you saying that it took a different form into matter, or did it create matter?
Well, if you're dealing with energy, it would have probably converted into matter, because we know energy can convert into matter.
Yeah, that I'll grant you that, but you're still stuck at zero with infinite matter that still needs an outside prime mover, not contingent on matter, to get finite particulars.
Well, I don't think there's infinite anything except for possibly space and time, but that's just movement possibilities. So it's not actually, if you have infinite time and space, it's just movement potential. I don't think the matter is infinite. There's probably there has to be a finite amount of it unless it's constantly being made. Then it might be infinite.
Yeah, and then the outside, what you're invoking, time and space, that goes back to it must have two key attributes: an omnipotence attribute to manipulate matter, and a consciousness to start the process of the manipulation. So
But there's other
puts
things that can start interactions between matter and interactions between energy and fluctuate that which we understand as matter and energy. So how to, again, like we're just going around in circles. You keep saying it has to be conscious, and I just
there's three
you're saying that's the only option. How have you eliminated the other options?
There's three key components here. You need consciousness for one. Second,
Why?
you need omnipotence, because there needs to be a shift from 0 to 1.
Yeah,
Because
but
if you're
why does
stuck
that
at
shift
0,
have to be conscious?
but if you're stuck at 0, you're invoking a new particular. That particular has to be there from the start.
But you're invoking a consciousness.
Yeah,
So you need to be able to explain how the consciousness exists, which is a much harder feat than just explaining that things exist because they can't not exist, because that's a contradiction.
the consciousness was there from the start. That's a brute fact. There's no getting around that.
How?
Unless,
You're
because
just asserting that.
because if the consciousness had a beginning, then that requires someone outside of that particular to insert a new particular. So you're
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, I agree that the prime mover has to be eternal.
Yeah, but it has to be an unmoved mover. It needs to be. It has to have all the particulars from the very start.
So how do you explain the origin of an unmoved mover?
Well, absolute nothingness is impossible. We've addressed this earlier. So the only alternative, this is a true dichotomy and it comports with the law of excluded middle, that it's either A or not A. So if it didn't have a beginning, it is then eternal. So that puts the particular as a necessity prime mover.
Yeah, something exists as a brute fact, but how can we say that it's conscious?
For there to be any measurement of time. Because if you look at the alternative, you then have to invoke randomness.
That's just
With
an
no,
argument
no,
from ignorance. Is
no,
you're
but there's
saying
no,
I don't understand how you can have an alternative, so therefore it is conscious. But
no,
that's
but you're invoking a mechanism without a particular. That particular that I'm invoking would be the consciousness. But to reiterate, you're invoking a mechanism, which is the consciousness without a particular.
how do you have consciousness without a mechanism?
No, the particular was there to begin with.
But I can say that about it. I could say the pixies were there to begin with, and that's why there's a universe. I can just say the energy was there to begin with. If I'm going to
That,
allow you that excuse, you have to allow me that excuse. And so that gets us nowhere because we can both use it. So it's not a distinguishing feature.
but so you're saying pixies as the starting point?
Sure, what if there was a conscious creator of the universe, but they're just pixies and they just throw out some pixie dust and that's matter. And that's the
But,
explanation of the universe.
those pixies, it's a category error because those pixies are finite in size. You need an infinite in size prime mover. So the pixie
I
would
don't
just
see why you
be.
need size at all. Size is a function of dimensions, which is space time, which is a result of matter. And so, if we're talking about the creation of matter in space time, why are we talking about size? Because size wouldn't exist until matter exists.
No, but if it's
Size is a spatial dimension.
if it's finite in size, meaning it has a curvature to it. So therefore, it is then contingent on something else without a curvature. So your assertion of pixies is a contingent particular on an infinite in size particular, that being God. So the pixie is just an assigned value, just a different title to God.
Well, it's a much less powerful version of God and a multiplicity of beings. Or you could just have one pixie, but it's still not omnipotent. It's just or omniscient. It's might be conscious, but maybe its only power is to create matter. Would you call that God or capital G God?
Yeah, because that pixie would share attributes that of a God. So that
Well,
pixie would just be God.
if the creator of the universe was just a blind idiot, would you call that a god and worship it? Or
Hang
if it
on, say
was
that
just
again.
a if the creator of the universe was a blind idiot and it had some sort of consciousness, it had power to create things, but it didn't know what it was doing, and it just has very little intelligence. Or maybe it's just has a lower intelligence where it can create matter and maybe observe the matter, but it's not the kind of omniscience or omnipotence that you would assign to the biblical God, sort of like some sort of magical pixie.
But irreducible complexity,
Isn't
blind
a thing.
person, that blind person needs like an omniscience IQ level. There's no getting around it. And the creation of matter, still requires, because you can't, that's the first law of thermodynamics, that energy
No, it's
can't
not.
create
The,
the zeroth law and the first law. So you can't make more three-dimensional structures of energy. So even if you go back to the blind person, like, that's just, again, that blind would just be an assigned value. It wouldn't be an attribute of God.
well, I'm saying there's a concept of the blind idiot God, which is just kind of it. It exists. It's conscious, but it has no idea what it's doing. And has no particular goals. It's just one of the concepts. But there is no law in physics or anything that says consciousness must be the cause of any of the physical properties that we're talking about, especially not in thermodynamics.
But well, then we're going back to the creation point, and then, but you have to understand, I granted you the space and time as the starting point. So you have, and just to reiterate, you have what you have been invoking is eternal, infinite in size, non-physical space-time. And it would have to be a color attached to it. So Occam's razor puts God as the winner in this scenario, even in that, because you're pitting God against space-time. But God has all the particulars to begin with. So Occam's razor puts God as the winner.
It seems like you're just asserting that
No, I'm not.
consciousness is extremely complex.
No, but you're saying that. Hang on. So, okay. So are you saying space-time created matter?
No,
And then from there, hang on. So are you saying matter is eternal now?
no.
There's no third option. It either had a beginning or it's eternal.
I'm saying that I've said a lot that matter and space time go together. They can't exist without the other. So
Okay,
something
so
something had to create them, which is eternal. You're asserting that it needs to be conscious. You haven't given an argument as to why. You've just asserted it, and
no, because
then you
we've
say it's the only option. And I have yet to hear a reason why it's the only option.
we've gone down this path, because
Yeah.
if it's not conscious, if it doesn't have the particular to begin with, then you're invoking a mechanism without a particular. So that would just go back to it being there from the start.
So what? You need a mechanism for consciousness.
No, I'm talking about the consciousness being there. And that's why I gave you the dream to
But
give you.
you're just saying that consciousness can just exist with no explanation. That's certainly doesn't pass the test of Occam's razor, and is just an assertion that I can use to say something without consciousness can just exist for no reason.
Hang on, repeat that last point.
You can just exist. Something without consciousness can just exist for no reason if I grant you that consciousness can exist for no reason, because you haven't explained why consciousness can exist just as a brute fact. You're just
Because
asserting that it
there's
exists.
too many after effects from the first creation point. So you have the existence of matter, and then the formation of matter, and then outside of that matter interacting with the matter. So if you want that puts that attribute outside of that matter, having an omnipotence and a consciousness. If you say that it doesn't have a consciousness, well, then it's random. Is that what you're invoking?
No, that's a false dichotomy.
What other option is there?
There's lots of things that are not random and not conscious.
That's an assertion.
No.
You just said lots of things, so you need to elaborate on these lots of things.
A rock? Is a rock conscious?
Well, no.
Is a rock random?
But this is before the formation of the rock.
Okay. So how are you eliminating something that's non-conscious and non-random? It seems like you just want it to be conscious. So you're asserting that it has to be.
A life. So life is another word for spontaneous movement without any outside interference. So the spontaneous movement is an inside mechanism. So if you see that rock bobbing up and down without any outside interference, that rock would have life to it. So that goes back to...
Or it could be in a fluctuating magnetic field.
No, but without going back to the origin point, because the prime mover would have to be infinite in size, not contingent on something else. So the prime mover was moving from the inside.
Okay.
So that prime mover would consist of life for there to be movement.
Well, not life, but consciousness.
Yeah, two of the same meanings.
But how can you say that consciousness is the only thing that can move from the inside?
Okay, if you see your chair bobbing up and down, what conclusion would you come up with?
Probably that there's some kind of force acting on it.
Yeah, but not something from the outside. So there's no wind. You've got your doors and your windows closed, and you see your chair bobbing up and down.
The last thing I would conclude is that the chair is conscious and aware of itself and choosing its own movements.
What other conclusion would there be?
That there could be some outside force, or maybe there's something happening inside the chair that's messing with its interaction with gravity.
Yeah, I thought you'd bring that in, but yeah, but the gravity is an outside.
Yeah, so if there's something inside happening that's cutting it off from the outside force, then it could be floating.
Yeah, but that's still... But to go back to the prime mover, because the chair is contingent on something, but the prime mover that we are invoking is not contingent on anything. So
yeah, but as far as we know, consciousness is contingent on things. So that's the most complex and far-fetched thing you could assert as a brute fact.
What do you mean by... You mean laws of logic, etc.?
Well, you would need laws of logic for a mind to operate in the first place, yes, but all the consciousness we know of can't exist just based on logic itself. It needs actual physical matter.
Hang on, so what paradox are you trying to set up here?
I don't know. I'm not trying to set anything up. I'm just telling you all the consciousness we've observed is highly complex and needs matter. And so if you're going to say that it just creates itself as a prime mover, it's just responsible for itself. Well, one, consciousness needs to have some sort of basis of operation, some sort of logic gate of some kind. The only consciousness we know of so far has those logic what do I want to call it? Calculations or whatever. That's based in matter, but it has to have some sort of logic to it. I'll even grant you that it could exist immaterially, but again, that consciousness is the product of those rules that allow it to calculate what's going on in the mind. A mind can't work without rules, or else that mind is random. And that actually sounds a lot more like what physicists are trying to describe with quantum fluctuations that are pretty much random, that result in the formation of matter. So it doesn't sound like any conscious mind is something that's plausible as the first mover.
Yeah, but the prime mover, we've agreed that the prime mover is immaterial. And then you have to grant me an immaterial consciousness, so then the laws of logic would therefore be immaterial as well.
Why would I need to grant you an immaterial consciousness?
No, because you're saying that a consciousness in context of God is contingent on the laws of logic. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, there's a major bootstrapping problem with God because he has to be able to, he's the creator of all things. So he would need to be able to have coherent logical thought before he creates logic, which is a contradiction.
You have to be more specific in what laws of logic he is contingent on.
Well, there's really only one, which is the law of identity. And from that, everything else flows.
Well, then you need to elaborate on that. What is the contradiction?
The contradiction is that if God is the cause of all things, he needs some of those things that he causes in order to be a being in the first place, which causes them. So
what do you mean?
Paradox.
No, it's not. So what thing? So well, then you need to elaborate even more. Is that God created things? So what is it about these things that's
well, God needs logical, coherent thought in order to create logical, coherent thought.
No, well, logic. You need it's too vague. You need to be more specific.
Well, logic is very specific in philosophy and mathematics. It's a language, at least for us, but the language adheres to certain immutable rules.
But you're saying he's contingent on logic.
Yeah, so without logic, God is just random thoughts. If we grant that it's a mind, it either has structured, ordered thoughts that adhere to logical coherency, or it isn't. So any mind would have to be bound by certain rules of operation. Our minds are bound by the rules of operation of neurons. God's or some immaterial mind would at least have to be bound by the rules of logic.
Okay, I have to bring the Bible into this, and I'll let you know when I'm finished.
Well, using the Bible to prove the Bible.
But this comports with us living in his consciousness. So Genesis 1.
It's going to be an assertion?
No. I'll let you know. Just give me some time with this. So Genesis 1 verse 27, we are made in God's image. So if you close your eyes and visualize an image, that image has no boundaries in your mind. So that would comport with the prime mover being a consciousness, and that we are living inside of his consciousness. So our minds are contingent on the eternal mind, and that eternal mind is not contingent on anything. So he sets the parameters for us to be contingent on.
So if it's not contingent on anything, then it's just random. It has no rules.
Well, I wouldn't say random, but he is.
Well, randomness is the only thing that has no contingencies. If it has order to it, then it's contingent upon what's creating that order.
But he's comporting to what is good. And so
can he make good whatever he wants, or is good just a set thing that is true regardless of what anyone thinks? Is good objective or subjective?
Well, it would be objective.
I would agree. Which means God's mind can't change it, which means God's mind is bound by whatever creates what's good. Good would be a truth, and God can't make something that's true untrue, and he can't make something that's untrue true.
Yeah, but with good comes evil, so he's choosing good over evil. So if he chose the path of evil, our minds would be contingent on a new set of parameters,
but
which we don't know. Yep.
Can God change what is good and what is evil?
Yes. Well, he's
not objective.
Well, good. It's one particular. It's like energy and matter. They're one and the same, but they take different forms. So, and that's the same with evil and good. Evil and good are one and the same, but they could take a different form. They are still one particular. So he's choosing the path of good.
Why?
Well,
correct.
Because of what?
Would God choose good because good is correct? It's the correct choice?
Well, yeah, I suppose so.
So, and God can't change what is correct. So it seems like God is contingent upon what is correct and what is true.
No, but he's choosing, like, good is correct and evil is incorrect. So he's choosing good over evil.
But he's not choosing what good is he?
Well, yeah, because there has to be an opposite to everything.
But so whatever is correct, God is choosing because it's correct. But if he could make it correct, then he wouldn't be making a choice. He would just, at least he wouldn't be choosing between correct and incorrect. He would be making the choice to create what is correct and incorrect. According to would be subjective.
I have to bring the Bible in again. It says that God is love. So love would then be good. So he is choosing, if not he was, love for all eternity. But he knows, he has the knowledge of evil.
Okay.
So yes, he is love.
I think there's some poetic truth in that. Good comes from evil, and by that I kind of mean, like, if you've ever heard the phrase "from darkness comes light," or stuff like that, where you could equate that to good and evil would be correct and incorrect, dark and light, or light and dark, light being correct. And like the way I understand it would be, like poetically, how those relate would be, so there's the incorrect, which would be manifested or whatever by the fact that absolute nothingness cannot exist because there's some kind of contradiction, meaning that it is incorrect. And so the correct exists because it cannot, existence cannot be in contradiction with itself. And for some reason, absolute nothingness is a contradiction because it cannot change. It has no properties. And therefore, if there is something, absolute nothingness could have never been. Therefore, from that contradiction flows existence, which is truth and light. And I think there's a lot of poetic truth there. But again, I just still don't see where a consciousness comes in.
We've had that discussion of the prime mover. So do you want to go back to that?
Well, that's been the linchpin of the whole conversation. Is we agree that there has to be a prime mover, that it's eternal, that it created matter and time and space. But you're asserting that it is conscious and it has to be conscious, and that's the only option. And I'm waiting for that reason.
You have the creation of matter, and then the formation of matter. And then you have universal consistency, that being over trillions of stars and planets. So that comports with teleology. So if you extrapolate that back, and biogenesis, life originates from life. So if you extrapolate that back, that prime mover consists of life.
But not biological life.
Well,
right?
life, like a consciousness, because life,
Yeah.
it's too many definitions to it, but it's spontaneous movement from the inside, no interference from the outside.
Yeah, at some point you're saying, well, it just exists. So something at some point it is able to create itself, or it just exists as a brute fact.
Yeah,
So
God is a brute fact.
You're allowing for this break of saying life comes from life. At some point, or consciousness comes from consciousness. At some point, it doesn't come from a different consciousness unless you have an infinite regress, which I think we can agree is absurd. But you're going to have to explain why it's a consciousness at that stage, and why it's not just a brute fact that the universe just exists because of a brute fact, and why it has to be a consciousness, and why consciousness can't just have been created later on. Life just created later on, because you say it has a starting point at some point. Life or consciousness did not come from life and consciousness originally. So why is it the prime mover?
But the evidence of genetics and astronomy, it puts you back to a consciousness, because you then have to invoke the laws of physics, the laws of nature, but those laws are immaterial and eternal and unchanging. So therefore, that comports with a mind, a consciousness that is also eternal, immaterial, and unchanging.
It might be consistent with one, but to say it's exclusively indicative, I don't see that.
There's no other option.
How have you eliminated the other options, though, is what I'm asking.
Because if it's not conscious, it would then have to be random. But even if I grant you that, you're invoking a mechanism without a particular unless someone outside of it is inserting that particular to get the mechanism.
But how do you know that it has to be either conscious or random?
There's no other option. It's either random or not random.
Yeah, but
If it's
that's
not
not
random,
or not conscious.
but if it's not random, therefore it has a purpose. And for something to have a purpose requires forward thinking to look
Things
into the
can happen
future.
without a purpose, though.
But we are on square zero. Before the movement of matter, before time existed, so that consciousness needs, this is a brute fact, that consciousness needs to be eternal. There's no getting around that.
You're just asserting that, though.
No, you need to then rewatch the recording, because that consciousness is a particular. So then for there to be a mechanism from 0 to 1, it requires there to be a particular. But if you're invoking that there is no particular, well, then you go from 0 to 1, from absolute randomness. But there's two. But before I grant you that, you still then have to account for the omnipotence. So that's another particular.
No, because
And
we
then
could have it move without a purpose and without consciousness and without randomness. Because the consciousness is bound by order. You can't explain how the consciousness exists. You're just asserting it as a brute fact, which means I can just assert anything as a brute fact.
no,
So
but
we
the movement
haven't gotten
well, there was inside movement. So I could just phrase it differently, and you have to accept it. There was inside movement, correct?
Sure. Which is, you're saying, is only achievable by consciousness?
Yeah, because that whole particular is moving.
But we can eliminate consciousness as an option, because consciousness cannot exist on its own with only inside forces. It has to have outside forces, or else consciousness cannot operate.
No, but I could just change the assigned value from consciousness to life. And then life, to elaborate, is an inside mechanism. So you have to grant me that. That's the brute fact. So that puts the prime mover to have life. Therefore, God.
I have to grant you, and you haven't really given a reason why I should do that. You're just saying it is, and I have to.
There's inside movement, an inside mechanism.
Which does not explain consciousness. Consciousness requires an outside movement.
No, but the prime mover is not contingent on an outside prime mover. It is infinite in size.
Right. So I think it's less likely to be a consciousness, because what we know of so far, conscious beings like us humans require a brain, which is an outside force. And what we've discussed so far is that conscious minds, even if they're immaterial, require some kind of outside force, which is a coherent structure, mechanism, operation, or logic for them to operate based on. Or else it's just a random thought, and can that even be considered thought if it doesn't have any structure?
Yeah, it takes an immaterial thought to produce a material result. So you can close your eyes and visualize anything. There's no delay in it. So if you extrapolate that back, this would comport with God, who is the eternal consciousness.
So you're
And the
saying
movement,
because you can imagine things, therefore the creator of the universe has to be like that?
no, that would explain his infinite size and the mechanism he uses to create things. Is that
I
it
don't
takes
think it explains anything because you're just saying consciousness just exists and it has no explanation.
no, when you close your eyes and visualize something, that image has no boundaries. So that explains God's infinite size, and it would explain the mechanism he uses to create things. It
How
takes an
does how does me having an imagination explain God's infinite size, even though time and space doesn't exist for matter?
no, because you have a consciousness, an immaterial thought that produces a material result. So then to extrapolate that back, God is an immaterial consciousness that can produce material results.
But you're not actually extrapolating. You're just saying that the prime mover has to be like you for some reason.
No, the prime mover has to be immaterial. We've already agreed to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then for there to be any material requires an immaterial cause for a material effect.
Yeah, and so far we know consciousness needs material. Our consciousness requires material. And if we mess with the material of our brains, our consciousness is changed. So it's entirely dependent upon the material. So extrapolating back from that, that means that if there was a God, it would require some sort of super material to create its mind, and God would need a creator.
See,
So
I'm gonna put Occam's razor in this again. So you have two particulars and I have one, because your particulars are that of omnipotence and a mechanism, but with mine is just a consciousness. So God is the simpler option.
but God has more mechanisms than any conceivable thing there is.
No, but your space
Consciousness
and time.
requires mechanisms.
No, but you we'll have we'll play this out again. Your claim of space and time and God, they are both eternal, infinite in size, non-physical. But what puts God as the winner is that he has an omnipotence to create matter. So he has that particular to begin with. You then have to insert a new particular out of nowhere. And then God has a consciousness for there to be any time to begin with. But
But
you're invoking another new particular that wasn't there to begin with.
yeah, I'm only invoking one. Aren't you invoking a particular that wasn't there before called God?
No, we've agreed that the particular are eternal, but you're invoking new particulars. But God already has these particulars to begin with.
I'm only invoking the law of identity, which is a lot simpler than any consciousness.
No, but you have to account for the creation of matter. So yours, and we've gone through this already, that the immaterial created finite matter, and then beyond the curvature of that finite matter is this infinite an eternal particular. So then that particular needs to have an omnipotence to manipulate and interact with the material, and there needs to be a consciousness for there to be any time to begin with, because from in that atheistic worldview, you have two particulars with nothing in between. So then if there was a time from 0 to 1 with two particulars, requires a choice for there to be 0 to 1. So no, it's not. That's a brute fact. There's no getting around that, because you have two particulars with nothing in between. There's no gaps. So then, because you invoked the first miracle from an atheistic worldview of matter, and then the second one is the formation of stars and planets. So the outside of that finite matter is manipulating the matter.
And unless then you assert that it has to be a consciousness.
Yeah. Unless you say that there was a formation from the start. So unless you say that matter came into existence and then instantly, so matter came into existence and then instantly took a different shape.
Why not? You're saying God came into existence for no reason and no explanation. Why can't I say that about matter?
Even if I grant you that
created matter. Well, you have to, if you're going to assert that, then you have to grant it for too.
Okay, I'll grant you that. Then what? What's the next process?
Well, we're back at square one, because both of us can just assert that that our particular view of the prime mover just exists as a brute fact for no explanation. So we haven't actually explained anything, and we've gotten nowhere.
No, because you have to assert gravity to get a black hole. You need a retraction. You need a second universe. Unless you're invoking an expansion first. So which one is it?
An expansion. The expansion would be second.
No, because it doesn't matter. It's either one of the two that you're proposing. So even if I grant you that, I need to clarify something. So are you now invoking a black hole, or are you invoking expansion of matter?
At the time of what we call the Big Bang, it would be more like an expansion of matter.
Okay, so then even if I grant
more of an expansion of space, so that matter can move through it.
Yeah, and would you agree that outside, well, you have to agree with this, that the outside of the matter is interacting with the matter? So that would require an omnipotence for outside of the matter to interact with the matter. For something non-physical to interact with matter requires an omnipotence attribute. That's a brute fact. So that outside of that finite particular would just be God. So then this goes back to a consciousness. But then for there to be a movement, because remember the two particulars, they both exist simultaneously of each other. So then why would there be an expansion to begin with? It would have been something unimaginable from the start.
So there has to be some kind of change that occurs, and the only thing that you can think of that would cause a change at that primordial level would be consciousness, right?
Yeah, because we've established that that attribute has to have an omnipotence. So for there to be,
But just because that's the only thing that you can think of doesn't mean that it's true.
there's no getting around that. For something non-physical to
I
interact with the
understand.
physical,
Yeah, I understand that's what makes sense to you, and you can't think of anything else. But that doesn't mean that we can objectively eliminate the other options or objectively rule in that one option just because it makes sense to you.
what other option is there?
There are non conscious changes in matter and energy.
Yeah, there, but yeah, that's the finite particular, the
And
energy
again,
and matter. But outside of it, is that not of energy and matter? So outside of it would be something non-physical, eternal, infinite in size, and it would have to have an omnipotence to interact and to manipulate the matter.
the
Unless,
other,
yep,
sorry, go on.
unless you're saying that the matter changed itself into multiple particulars, but I can't grant you that because that particular would just take a different form again. So it will go from one particular to a different new particular, but it's still one particular. And that goes back to the pool analogy that a pool of water can't make ice cubes inside of itself. It needs to change its whole form into the ice cube or into ice. So that
So,
goes back. Yep.
so going back to like the other options. So if you have a consciousness, there's we can't explain why there's a consciousness, and whatever explains that or just allows that can be applied to non-conscious things as well that can make changes that lead to uh, matter separating from antimatter and creating the universe. So within that's the thing is God's not a simple explanation. It's actually the more complex explanation, and it's not really an explanation at all. But if we grant that it's an explanation, within that explanation are all the things that already allow for the universe to just exist without a consciousness, because you're saying that consciousness can just exist. But there are things that are much simpler than a consciousness that can lead to fluctuations and changes in the interactions that can lead to matter without consciousness. So
Okay,
that's
we are going to narrow in on this. So you're invoking dark matter. Again, dark matter and God, well, and antimatter. The, that shares antimatter shares attributes that of a God because they are both eternal, infinite in size, non-physical, three-dimensional.
well,
But the
no,
difference,
antimatter is literally just matter with an opposite spin. So there's an
but the-
anti-hydrogen, and it has substance and matter. But if it touches a hydrogen, they eliminate each other and just create energy.
yeah, but it's a non-physical,
No,
right?
antimatter is physical. It's material.
Well, that just puts you back to it being matter. It was all matter. So
So
you have infinite matter.
if something can just if we accept that consciousness can just exist as a brute fact, and it has the power to separate matter from antimatter or create matter and antimatter, or create the energy which creates matter and antimatter. Why can't we accept that they can just exist as a brute fact without a consciousness?
There's two things here. So that attribute requires an omnipotence, and that attribute requires a consciousness for there to be any movement in time, because time is the measurement of matter, the movement of matter.
But you're
So,
just saying
but
that it
that
requires a consciousness.
yeah, but that
If
is a
that consciousness can just be asserted that it just exists for no reason, why do we need that consciousness? Why can't we just say that the result of that consciousness just exists for no reason?
but there was a very specific mechanism, because if you're saying that it's random, that would mean the whole particular took a different shape. This is fine-tuned, and this comports with teleology and biogenesis. Because of fine-tuning, that to extrapolate that back, that requires a forward thinker, a consciousness. Because the only alternative is randomness. But you have over trillions of stars and planets. That's universal consistency. And that's just one aspect. And then you got genetics, our material vessels. So extrapolate that back, that requires a consciousness.
What are you extrapolating though? You're just saying we have consciousness, therefore the universe needs consciousness? That doesn't follow.
Life exists. Well, you're now, are you appealing to Hinduism?
No.
Well, you're saying that because Hindus believe that matter is eternal. Well, some do. So you said that.
I'm not sure about that, but I don't believe that.
Well, you said that the universe is conscious.
No, isn't that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying the prime mover before the existence of matter has a consciousness. But if you're saying that the material, the universe itself is a consciousness, well, then that's Hinduism.
I think that part of the universe is conscious, which is us.
Yeah, but how we are not all eternal of each other. That's Hinduism, because they believe in over millions of gods.
And what's the problem in saying Brahma, who's going back to your dream analogy, the universe is Brahma's dream. He's a consciousness.
Well, that's theology. We can discuss theology, but that's a topic on which God it is. So you have to concede that God exists for us to have that discussion.
But I don't concede that there is any kind of consciousness there, because it's an unnecessary step. You're adding too many, like Occam's razor requires just the bare minimum. If you add unnecessary steps, then it's no longer passes the test of Occam's razor. Now that's doesn't necessarily make it true, but that is one reason I don't believe that it's conscious, is because it doesn't need to have consciousness, because if you have consciousness has all these characteristics that you can just have existing as brute facts, and then consciousness is an extra step that is actually unnecessary, because those things have to exist for consciousness to exist, and those things exist if a consciousness exists. So why not just take out the unnecessary part and just have the necessary parts?
But I can just use Occam's razor on you, is that because God would consist of all these particulars, if not one particular from the start, but you're invoking new particulars coming into existence.
I'm trying to invoke as little as possible.
Yeah, that puts God as the winner because he has these attributes
Because
from
the
the
more
start.
if you're saying God has more particulars, that's making it less likely to pass the test of Occam's razor, because you're saying
No, but we could just
more
say
moving parts.
no.
I'm trying to start with the minimum necessary parts that we
No,
need.
we could just we'll just say one particular both ways. So your prime mover has one particular, and then mine one particular. But you're invoking new particulars, something new coming into existence, and that would be the omnipotence attribute and a consciousness, the time aspect.
Aren't you the one invoking omnipotence and consciousness?
No, I'm invoking an eternal prime mover, but you're
So am I. I just don't think it's
yeah,
conscious.
but again, to reiterate, for there to be time requires an immaterial eternal cause, and that cause requires a choice, a consciousness to interact and push time forward.
It doesn't need a choice, it just needs a cause.
Yeah, and a cause is immaterial.
It doesn't have to be a conscious choice, though. Why would it need to be a conscious cause?
Because then
If there are unconscious causes that are possible, then those could just exist as brute facts. But if you're invoking a conscious cause, you're invoking way more complex parts. And so that's less simple and less likely to pass Occam's razor.
we have one particular each, and that particular firstly, it needs to have an omnipotence. And then the second one is that it requires a consciousness for there. It has to choose, it has to know. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a formation before the stars and planets. Unless you're saying that the stars and planets are all eternal.
But a conscious choice is a cause of some sort. So a conscious choice is a lot more. You're invoking a lot more than if you're saying that it's an unconscious cause.
A consciousness in this context is an unmoved mover. So,
but a consciousness cannot exist without things moving it.
No, but the consciousness was already moving. That's why I gave you the dream. It's the best way to explain it.
If you can accept that a consciousness just exists and it's already moving, why can't the cause without a consciousness just exist without that's already moving?
Because the consciousness needs to tie in together with the omnipotence. So that consciousness and omnipotence is one particular. But if you're invoking an omnipotence without a consciousness, well, then you require something outside of the geometry of that immaterial particular.
But just because it's causing matter to exist doesn't require a consciousness. You're saying it has to be a conscious cause. I'm saying it could be an unconscious cause. And you're giving me no way to tell whether, like, you're giving me no way to eliminate the unconscious cause. You're just saying that it has to be a conscious cause because it has to have a cause, but again, there are things that can be caused which are unconscious, and we can just say that it exists as a brute fact either way. So there's no way
But you
to
have
eliminate one or the other, and so
eternal meaning unchanging. So you have eternal. This is what you've been invoking, an eternal space time. So then, without a without something already existing there, you're then invoking two random particulars. The first one is the omnipotence, and then the second one is the consciousness to choose to create the matter, which ties in with the omnipotence. But with God, he has those things from the start.
why couldn't some unconscious cause have that from the start?
Because the unconscious to create matter. So that's the first red flag. And then, well, even if I grant you that, like I'll grant you that. And then that's, and then the immaterial prime mover to interact with the matter, and then the matter expanding, for all that movement to be happening, it requires a consciousness. It's like knocking down dominoes. You need someone to knock down the first domino.
Why does it have to be someone?
Well, it's a consciousness, an immaterial. That we can test that ourselves just by what other explanation is there?
An unconscious cause.
But would that be immaterial?
Sure.
We can't. The burden of proof is on you now. You have to demonstrate how there could be an immaterial cause without a consciousness.
I don't really care. I want you to demonstrate that it has to be a conscious cause. So neither of us demonstrate that. So I'm not gonna believe you.
You have a line of dominoes, and then that first domino. So all those dominoes are material, and then the first domino outside of it would be immaterial. So
Okay,
I can.
So the first domino, let's say it decides to fall over. I wouldn't call that God. What if that's the only thing you can do?
Outside of those dominoes, so those dominoes are finite particulars, and then outside of those dominoes would be something infinite in size and non-physical. And that would require a consciousness, because we can demonstrate that the immaterial, the consciousness was to knock down the dominoes. So then what would you invoke as the alternative?
Whatever is allowing consciousness, whatever you're saying is allowing consciousness to exist out of brute fact, I can invoke that for an unconscious cause.
No, because you then have to say that the domino itself knocked itself down, correct?
Sure.
Well, then that domino would consist of a consciousness, because that's an inside mechanism.
Why does an inside mechanism have to be conscious?
Because without any outside interference, spontaneous movement requires a consciousness.
What if it's just fluctuating inside of itself and there's interference between the fluctuations and there's asymmetry in the fluctuations and sometimes it moves?
But then the very first movement, so would that, just to have an understanding, is that An
Whatever's
outside prime mover or an inside?
whatever's allowing that consciousness to exist can just allow a less complex uncaused or unconscious cause.
No, because that falls back to absolute nothingness, which we've already discussed. That is impossible. So if you want to go back down that regress, it'll always fall back to absolute nothingness. And we've already had that discussion that absolute nothingness is impossible.
Because if I assert that something exists by brute fact, that does not lead towards absolute nothingness.
No,
I'm
you're
just
saying
saying
that,
it's a simpler existence than what you're proposing.
no, you're saying that a mover requires another mover. So if you keep going back, that will
Well,
just fall back to absolute nothingness.
well, yeah, a consciousness does require another mover, which is why I'm saying that's the least likely option.
For Occam's razor, because that would only be the immaterial, but you then have to invoke something that is not immaterial and not material.
Well, just saying a consciousness exists doesn't explain why material exists or why the consciousness exists. But it's simpler to say that the material just exists because material is less complex than consciousness. So that's how Occam's razor fits into that. And the fact that consciousness seems to require some kind of outside mover means that that's not likely. So that's double Occam's razor for it being unlikely. It's the God explanation is more complex and it requires an outside mover. So
No, but you're invoking a mover that is not of matter and is not immaterial. So that's a contradiction. So A is B, but A is not B. So the burden of proof is on you again to demonstrate what is there other than the material and the immaterial. Otherwise, if it's just one immaterial, well, then that immaterial will be infinite in size. It wouldn't be contingent on another outside mover. So that puts God as the unmoved mover.
but it seems like a contradiction because consciousness can't exist without something defining that consciousness.
Hang on, say that again.
That's a contradiction. So it consciousness requires something outside of it in order to exist or to do anything. So
No, but that's square 7. We are on square 1.
consciousness can't be the unmoved mover because something is moving it.
No, but that immaterial particular is the consciousness. That whole particular is the consciousness.
Right, and it's defined by something outside of that consciousness. The consciousness
No,
is
but,
the result of whatever you're saying is creating the consciousness. The consciousness itself doesn't just exist. It follows rules at the very least.
no, but that particular is immaterial. But if you're invoking that particular requires an outside mover, well, then that outside mover has to be something else other than the immaterial.
So if we have an immaterial consciousness, then it's still being defined by something that's immaterial. The consciousness is
But
still resulting in being caused by an immaterial cause. The consciousness is not itself the cause.
so are you invoking two consciousness?
No.
In two, yeah, because the particular is the consciousness. So, but are you invoking a particular outside of that pre-existing particular that has a consciousness.
No, but I understand why you think that.
You're going down an unlimited regress.
No, I'm saying the regress has to end. So a consciousness can never be the start of that regress because a consciousness depends on other things. It can never be the unmoved mover.
But even if we play that out, the regress, that puts you back to absolute nothingness, because that absolute nothingness would be the immaterial cause.
Absolute nothingness cannot cause anything. That's why it can't
Yeah,
exist, because
but
something does exist.
but you've been invoking outside movers of new particulars. So that puts you back to absolute nothingness.
No, I'm just saying if you allow for something to just exist as a brute fact, it's a lot easier to say that an unconscious cause exists by brute fact than a conscious cause, because consciousness is comprised of a lot of different traits and qualities and attributes that unconscious things are not necessarily.
But what are you invoking that as a brute fact?
Something exists.
Yeah, and that something it can't be contingent on something outside of it. It has to be independent.
Yeah, that's why consciousness is very unlikely to, if not impossible, to be that brute fact, because consciousness has to depend on something outside of it, because the consciousness is defined by things that are outside of that consciousness, or
But
paradoxically are the result of that consciousness. So that's also not an option.
but that prime mover, again, immaterial prime mover, and we can demonstrate that it's a consciousness because it requires an immaterial thought to produce a material result. So going back to the dominoes analogy, you have outside of the first domino requires an immaterial cause. We can demonstrate that because God would just, in his mind, create the dominoes, and then he would, just with his will alone, he would knock down the first domino. I think you're frozen on the screen.
No, I'm just wondering how to bring it back. So, I mean, we've just been going in circles a little bit.
It's almost 2.5 hours, so it's up to you what you want to do from here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could. I think we should talk about some other topics at a later date, but I'll just kind of sum up again what my grievance is, and I we kind of agreed that omnipotence could mean that it's the ultimate result of everything, not necessarily that it is the ability to do anything. That it's just the first domino to fall, which causes all other dominoes to fall. But I really don't think omnipotence is a good word for that. But really, my grievance in the God debate is whether or not the prime mover / creator is conscious. And I don't think consciousness is an explanation of anything, because if you allow for consciousness to just exist as a brute fact, then simpler things can be asserted as existing as brute facts. Non-conscious causes, fluctuations in immaterial or material existences. And there's also contradictions when you just assume the premise that consciousness is the prime mover, because one, consciousness obeys laws and is comprised of things that would, by definition, need to be the result of the consciousness. So that's a paradox. And consciousness just, it can't be, in my view, the prime mover, because it needs it is dependent upon other things. So that is a direct contradiction to the premise. So therefore, it is irrational to conclude that it is the prime mover. And we've gone back and forth on that. I'm sure you'll know my position, but I'll give you the final word, and then maybe we can set up some other topics.
I'll just end it with, well, thanks for responding to my emails. Again, I'll just mention my YouTube channel to those listening. I have a YouTube channel, Phillip Christian YouTube. I think we'll end it there. Thanks again.
All right, man. And then I guess we can end the stream there. But
Yeah,
I would like to talk to you for a minute afterwards. So
yep,
thanks
sure.
for tuning in. Or if anyone would like to come on, just post in the chat and I'll keep it going. And yeah. So I'll keep it going for another minute. So you mentioned, did you say it was you were a flat earther?
Yeah, but I don't want to discuss that.
Like for a future topic?
Are you still recording?
Yeah, I'm gonna allow people in chat to say if they want to come on.
Yeah. Oh, look,
We don't have to
yeah.
we definitely
It's
should
been,
now, but
yeah,
if you want to do in the future.
yeah, maybe. I just debate God in general.
All
I
right.
leave that to Nathan Thompson to debate flat Earth. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yeah. I was emailing him for a while. He said he wouldn't debate it unless it was like biblically based, and then I just kind of gave up because he would
Oh, okay.
yeah, I might try and email him again.
Well, I'm gonna end it here. I need to lie down. It's been
All right, man.
2.5 hours. All
Yeah,
right.
well, thanks for coming on, and yeah, you have my email.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again. I'll see you later.
So yeah. All right, I'm gonna give all of y'all's one more chance to come in. But other than that, I'm gonna pack it in. Seems like Ian like to come in one day in the future. All right, yeah. In case Philip was telling me that my email is not on my profile, so I'll just put it in the chat real quick. And whoever wants to email me can email me, and then I'll call it a night. And when is your next debate with Nephilim free? I don't know. I think nothing's scheduled. I'm not gonna go seeking him out. But if he challenges me, or if I'm in a random like open mic or chat with him, then that's when it's gonna happen. So yeah, I think I would like to debate him on dinosaurs living with man again, and there was this book that he claims that they threw out human remains fraudulently, and he just ignores the sentence where they say that they kept the human remains. So yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, I've been pretty busy, but Yeah. And I've also been busy with just like writing some scripts for the channel. So it's been a lot of like pre-production, and I get distracted easily. So I'm going to try and do like more live shows. Because of the produced content takes a lot of time, but I really like doing that. So yeah. Um yeah, Nephi likes to speak a lot. I think he likes the sound of his own voice. Creationists tend to have like very unique voices. I think that's part of the kind of part of the how they I don't want to sound mean, but how they get people to pay attention. Um, having a unique voice is definitely a part of having a public persona. Yeah, Nephilim. What was that? I forget exactly what it was, but I remember I did. I think I was just making fun of him about farting, and I did smoke on the screen. That was fun. And let's see, right? It's more about preventing the devil and deceiving the church. All right, well, uh, and yeah, I'll get Nicholas on again. And yeah, we still have to talk about lots of stuff. Um, Specifically, his argument for God. He's always improving it. So yeah, I'll go on his show or he'll come on mine, whatever. Yay, yeah. So, any last words, and I'll log off. Yeah, he's not as blusterous as some of them are. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. This was, I think, my most successful live stream view wise, making a comeback. All right. Yeah, I would love to talk about why Jesus makes God obvious. I don't think it's obvious that much is obvious about Jesus. So, yeah. Bye, I guess. Yeah. Um, Thanks, guys. And I'll be doing some stuff soon. And my produced content will be out soon, too. Some of that. It'll be pretty good. All right. I think we can log off now. And we just got 7 viewers. So start the cast over and like and comment and subscribe and all of that. And thank you. Goodbye.